Welcome to a series where we talk about the World Cup histories of each nation at the 2026 World Cup. Today, we'll be talking about our northern neighbors, the Ice Goons. If the US doesn't take soccer seriously, then Canada Omega doesn't take soccer seriously. Canadians care more about hockey, basketball, baseball, Tim Hortons, Canadian football, and American football more, roughly in that order. Even though you'd expect Canada to regularly be at the World Cup based on their international significance, the sport's lack of presence in an already small country means you end up with a pretty niche Canadian soccer scene that is largely dominated by players whose families have recently immigrated to Canada. Recently, though, Canadian soccer has been in a better place than ever before and should have genuine hope for a decent run at this upcoming World Cup taking place on home soil. Canada's World Cup history is barren to start out, and that's because they joined the British nations in the OG Brexit and just didn't compete as a national team from 1928 all the way until 1957. That means no entry for Uruguay 1930, Italy 1934, France 1938, and despite being a member of FIFA by this point, also nothing for Brazil 1950 or Switzerland 1954. Their first time attempting to qualify was for Sweden 1958, where they were one of 6 competitors from North and Central America. In their 3-team group with Mexico and the United States, Canada won both their games against the States, but lost both to El Tri, eliminating them from contention. Canada would duck the smoke ahead of Chile in 1962, withdrawing before their group games against Mexico and the US. They would also skip out on England 1966. The nation was enjoying the final couple seasons of Original Six hockey. But ahead of Mexico 1970, our peaceful neighbors would once again attempt to qualify, this time out of a region where their strongest competition was automatically qualified as hosts and CONCACAF was suddenly wide open. Les Rouges would be placed in a group with the United States and Bermuda, and this group would end up being decided by the results from the frontrunners against the Bermudans since they beat each other home and away. Unfortunately for Canada, their game in Hamilton finished 0-0, while the US was able to beat Bermuda home and away and win the group. This is when CONCACAF changed their qualification from its own dedicated thing to the CONCACAF Championship, and considering Canada wasn't even able to qualify for that thanks to being in the same group as Mexico, West Germany 1974 was another Canadian no-show. The qualification process for Argentina in 1978 was more forgiving for the Northerners though, as 2 of the 3 of Mexico, Canada, and the US would make it to the 6-team CONCACAF Championship, and this time Canada claimed that second spot in a playoff after a 3-way tie on points was given to Mexico on goal difference, and Canada beat the US in the playoff. This put Canada into a beta version of the Hex alongside Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, and Suriname, where only one team could make it through a single round robin. Here, a loss to El Salvador put them in an untenable position, as despite wins against both Suriname and Guatemala, a draw with Haiti put them too far behind Mexico to catch up. The country was about to be enraptured by the greatness of Wayne Gretzky, so their absence at Argentina in 1978 will be made up for. Qualification for España 1982 had the same format, and Canada would once again reach that Beta Hex group after topping their group with Mexico and the US, and they would compete in this Beta Hex against Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, Cuba, and Haiti. This time, though, with the World Cup having expanded to 24 teams, the top 2 in this group would qualify, and Canada really should have been one of them. They opened the group with a clutch 1-0 win over El Salvador and a late winner from Mike Stojanovic, and I'm not kidding, one more win in this round robin would have put Canada in the World Cup. Instead, Haiti played them to a draw, the home team Honduras beat them on their way to qualifying for the World Cup, Mexico would draw Canada as well, and with one last chance to get the key win for qualification, Cuba would nick a 2-2 draw and eliminate Canada, who was a mere point away from finishing level with El Salvador and going through on a tiebreaker. This is the closest Canada has come up to this point, and it provided the springboard for 1986. Qualification for Mexico 1986 was weird. With Mexico getting the automatic spot as hosts, you would think that would make things easier for Canada, but that was not the case. CONCACAF would only get one spot to split among the entire rest of their federation, once again done through the CONCACAF Championship, now contested by 9 teams. Canada would qualify to this after their head-to-head playoff against Jamaica ended with the Reggae Boys withdrawing, but they now had to top 2 different groups of 3 in order to make it to the World Cup. Amazingly though, it happened. Canada would beat Haiti home and away, get 3 of 4 points in the games against Guatemala, and reach the final group where they met Honduras and Costa Rica. Drawing Costa Rica home and away was whatever, but George Pecos netted the Canadians the goal they needed to beat Honduras away, and after beating Honduras back home in the brutal cold of Newfoundland, thanks to Honduras getting the most of their points in their games against Costa Rica, it wasn't even close. Canada was comfortably the continental winners for the very first time, and we're now going to the World Cup for the very first time as well. This qualification may have been a dream for Canada, but the draw for Mexico 1986 became a Canadian nightmare. Listen to this draw. European champions France have some of the best players in the world. The Soviet Union team was basically a club team with a few great players as well. This is to date the only time Dynamo Kiev has ever qualified for the World Cup. And you also have a third European team in Hungary. I mean, what is there to say? God's love may be ambiguous, but the devil unambiguously hates Canadian soccer. When we actually got to the World Cup, I don't know, I guess it could have gone worse. The first game versus France was actually pretty exciting. The Canucks managed to hold France goalless for most of the game, and they only conceded to Papin in the 79th minute, and they fell 1-0 in a game no one expected to be that close. This gave Canada an actual springboard, one that they did not take. Hungary was the game they needed to win if they wanted any shot of finishing third and sneaking into the knockouts, and instead they conceded in the second minute of the game and lost 2-0. A second 2-0 loss to the Soviet B team left Canada at the bottom of the group with 0 points, 0 goals scored, and if anything, merely a moral victory against Platini's French team. Canada's appearance at Mexico 1986 gave them a serious springboard to become one of the powers in CONCACAF moving forward, a springboard that they once again did not take. The death of the NASL a few years before left many great Canadian players stranded, and the Federation would enter a dark age. 1990 was another great opportunity for all of CONCACAF with 2 qualification spots and Mexico banned from the tournament, but the Canucks didn't even make it to the 5-team CONCACAF championship after losing a 2-legged playoff to Guatemala on away goals. This was a shocking disappointment coming off the heels of a World Cup appearance. USA 94 was yet another opportunity for Canada thanks to the US hosting, as CONCACAF had a second automatic spot and a third spot in the playoffs. Canada would finish second place in their first group and advance to the final group of 4 alongside El Salvador, Honduras, and Mexico. Here, the Canadians sprung a bit of a surprise, starting things off by drawing Honduras in Tegucigalpa, then beating both El Salvador and Honduras back home. This put Canada in the automatic qualifying spot 3 games in, where they would get the shit beaten out of them at the Azteca. A gutty win away at El Salvador left the door open for Canada should they get a win against Mexico at home, but a late winner from Francisco Javier Cruz left Canada in the second playoff spot instead. Canada now had to beat the winner out of Oceania and then a team from South America to make the World Cup, and they wouldn't even do the first. In the playoff against Australia, Canada's home game in cold-ass Edmonton resulted in a Canadian win. That's nice, but winning 2-1 at home in a game where the Socceroo goalie was red-carded 17 minutes in, that's a missed opportunity, and you can't leave that door open for the Aussies. Tied 1-1 late in the second game, Mehmet Durakovic would give Australia a leg-tying goal, and remaining tied after extra time, the mental giants of Australia would dominate the penalty shootout to finally lay Canada's qualification hopes to rest. This 1994 near miss proved to be a bit of a mirage moving forward, unfortunately. Qualification for France in '98 started well, with Les Rouges topping a group with El Salvador, Panama, and Cuba, but after making it to the Hex, things nosedived. Things started as poorly as they possibly could have. Another 4-0 loss at the Azteca and a 3-0 loss in Palo Alto to the States were both demoralizing, and 0-0 draws at home against El Salvador and Jamaica weren't really morale boosters either. What did help certainly was a 1-0 win in Edmonton against Costa Rica, and this left them fully in grasp of everyone that wasn't Mexico and within a shot at a World Cup appearance. So what happened? Well, they lost 1-0 in Kingston to Jamaica and then had a 4-banger dropped on them at the Cuscatlan by El Salvador, and that left them stranded in last place. Canada would scrape a 2-2 draw with Mexico, but would otherwise finish dead last, nowhere close to a qualification spot. For Korea-Japan 2002, Canada would start their qualification process with a narrow playoff win over Cuba and would be drawn into a 4-team group with Mexico, Panama, and Trinidad and Tobago. With the top 2 advancing, this wasn't the end of the world until they lost 2-0 at home to Trinity and tied 0-0 with Panama. Canada would finish third in this group and wouldn't even make it to the Hex. Germany 2006 was even worse. Canada would have no issue with Belize in the playoff leg, but in a 4-team group with Honduras, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, Canada would be rooted to the bottom of the group the whole time, only winning their final game and finishing last place, coming nowhere close to the Hex. For South Africa 2010, Canada would win their playoff again, this time against St. Vincent and the Grenadines, but the group draw fucked them, putting them with Mexico, Honduras, and Jamaica. What? Canada fought like hell in this group, not suffering a single loss and embarrassed the nation, but they could only scrap 2 draws and they still finished dead last in the group, finishing even further away from the Hex. Brazil 2014 saw Canada once again breeze to the penultimate group stage, where they finally got a good draw and landed in a group with Honduras, Panama, and Cuba. After half of the double round robin, they sat ahead of a Panama team they beat in Toronto and a Honduras team they drew 0-0 against, also in Toronto, but things unraveled in a dramatic way on the second half of match days. Losing at Panama was not great. Beating Cuba 3-0 at home was a nice bounce back that put them in a position to get to the Hex with just a draw away at Honduras. What followed was an 8-1 humiliation and a day of reckoning for Canadian soccer. No Hex for Canada, and things had to get better, otherwise the nation was going to slip further into obscurity. Russia 2018 saw Canada win a playoff against Dominica to reach a group of 4 that included Mexico, El Salvador, and their old friends Honduras. Canada would start the group by avenging their 8-1 loss to Honduras by beating them 1-0 in Vancouver. This gave them something to build on, and after drawing 0-0 in San Salvador and losing home and away to Mexico, this brought them back to San Pedro Sula for a huge game against Honduras. Win and you're in great position to advance to the Hex. Lose 2-1, you're not making it to the Hex for the 5th consecutive qualifying campaign. Those freaking Hondurans did it to them again. It's at this point that FIFA announced Canada's joint bid with Mexico and the United States to host the 2026 World Cup as the winning bid, and this was celebrated across the entire continent, at least at the time, but for Canada specifically, this was huge. It guaranteed Canada would make a World Cup for the first time since the 80s and started some serious momentum forward for the Federation. Things had gotten incredibly dark for our northern neighbors, but there was light at the end of the tunnel. As it turned out, Canadian fans would not even have to wait until 2026 to see their national team back at the World Cup. For Qatar 2022 qualifying, Canada would begin the whole process by winning 4 games of 4 and qualifying out of a group that included Suriname, before beating another group winner, Haiti, in a playoff to advance to not the Hex, this is the octagonal with 8 teams. Things didn't start amazingly. A 1-1 draw against Honduras and Toronto isn't encouraging, but things picked up from here. A draw against the States in Nashville, a 3-0 pasting of El Salvador and Toronto, a draw at the Azteca against Mexico, a scrappy draw in Kingston against Jamaica. These are all good results. It's the last 2 results of the first half of the round robin, though, that put Canada in a good place. A 4-1 undressing of Panama at home, it was huge in putting Canada in 3rd place, which they would keep after the 1-0 home win against Costa Rica. This put them in 3rd place, right behind Mexico and the US, and on top of that, Canada had a tie for the best goal difference in the octagonal at this point. There was reason for optimism, but no one could have predicted what happened next. This Canadian team was clearly on the upswing and at the very least could be counted on to not embarrass themselves once 2026 rolled around, but they had a very good chance to qualify here and now, and the next game put them in the driver's seat. Playing in Alphonso Davies' hometown Edmonton against Mexico, Kyle Larin would score a brace and give Canada a historic 2-1 win over Mexico in the freezing cold of a stadium now known as the Azteca. They would win most of their games from here on out, including against the United States, and to everyone's surprise, not only would Canada grab an automatic spot, but little old Canada up north would win the octagonal and qualify for the World Cup on a tsunami of momentum. This is literally the highest high Canadian soccer has ever seen, and it's honestly so exciting as someone with Canadian French heritage that is always looking for new teams to root for. Let's hold on to that excitement though, because the draw happens next and Canada ends up in a group that looks tough at the time and ends up being a group of death. Belgium's not bad out of pot 1. This is a super overrated Belgian team in a transition period, but reigning runners-up Croatia out of pot 2 and a dangerous Morocco team out of pot 3 is tough. I remember feeling pretty sorry for the Canadians after this draw, and we didn't even know the half of it yet. Belgium came into the game ranked number 2 in the world, and Canada may be the land of endless ice caps, but this was the iciest cap on Earth in November 2022. I'm not sorry for saying that either. Belgium, number 2 in the world, was a wild take. They didn't even end up being number 2 in this group, and we saw why when they took the pitch against Canada. Wasted chance after wasted chance, dominant possession leading to nothing. This is what you would think a disappointing Belgian performance would look like, but it's worse. This is what Canada looked like. Belgium was being run off the pitch by the Maple Warriors, and if not for Thibaut Courtois literally being God and saving a penalty from Alphonso Davies, Canada would have had the lead. Instead, the Red Devils scored right before halftime on the most smash and grab against the run of play Route 1 bullshit you've ever seen. Canada would continue to put more pressure on Belgium than the German military during both World Wars, but it was all for nothing. Belgium won, Canada 0, and nothing but moral victories for a Canada team that still doesn't have a single World Cup goal yet. With one foot out of Qatar already, Canada would play defending runner-ups Croatia next, and Alphonso Davies made up for the missed pen by scoring immediately. Unfortunately for the Canadians, the rest of the game would go complete opposite to the Belgium games. It was the dudes wearing checkers that would dominate possession and chances, and they were much less wasteful in this game than Canada was in the last one. The Croatian midfield dominated more and more as the game went on, with Andrej Kramaric finding an equalizer and Croatia tacking on 3 more goals after that just casually. Canada was now out of the World Cup with a game to go. They got the old Poland special, and while they had a lot to be proud of from this performance, they were now playing for 2026. Game 3 against Morocco was kind of weird, with a very early goal once again coloring the game. Though in this case it was Canada proving the stereotype true and very kindly gifting Morocco a free goal. Morocco would go up 2-0 not long after and would end up holding that lead and taking home all 3 points, leaving Canada on 0 points in Qatar and to this day 0 points in any men's FIFA World Cup. Still though, Canada would score a freak own goal to close the game at 2-1, a creditable scoreline against a side that would end up running it all the way until the semifinals. Even more notable is that this is the only goal Morocco conceded all the way until they played France in the semis, with them holding both Belgium and Croatia scoreless before this, and then keeping a clean sheet against 2 of the strongest teams in the world, Spain and Portugal. Canada had such a unique World Cup experience in Qatar. To play that well and finish with 0 points is a massive disappointment in a vacuum, and we've seen other countries with similar levels of expectations crash out after a tournament like this. But Canada is in a unique position to build off this. Not only were they in a very tough group, not only were their expectations basically just please score this time, guys, but on top of that, getting World Cup experience for a young team making their first appearance in generations ahead of co-hosting in 2026, this could end up being the best thing that could have happened to the national team. That gets us to North America 2026, where as co-hosts, Canada are qualified automatically and placed in Pot 1, getting that co-host privilege. Their group draw? Oh man, this is the Big Brother meme. Canada is so used to giving and now they finally get to receive. After crazy draws in both 1986 and 2022, Canada would get Switzerland out of Europe, a tough, underrated but beatable team, Qatar, who just crashed out of their own World Cup 4 years ago, and then a European playoff winner that could have been Italy, scary, but turned out to be Bosnia and Herzegovina. When I say this is a winnable group for Canada, I don't mean they could make the knockouts. Frankly, they should reach the knockouts out of this. If I'm Canada, I'm aiming higher after this. I think Canada could genuinely win the group. I'll talk about my actual predictions in the final Group B video, but I feel better about Canada than I do about either my United States or Mexico coming into this World Cup, and I could have never imagined saying that when we got awarded the hosting rights. This sudden meteoric rise of Canadian soccer has truly been special. That was part 5 of our 48-part series breaking down the history of every single team participating at the 2026 FIFA World Cup. And even though this is one of the briefer histories we have, I still had a fun time looking at this team that just wasn't shit for so long and is now a genuinely good and competitive team. Tomorrow we look at a national team that has been good and competitive for much longer, but has yet to break through at the World Cup and be more than that. We'll be looking at yet another cold team, the mountain climbers, the neutrals, the bankers, the cheesemakers. We'll be talking about the history of the Switzerland national soccer team, a much longer history than you might expect. I hope you all enjoyed this video and stick around for the next 43 until it's time to kick off the greatest sporting event in the world, a little bit of which will be in Canada.